Hello and welcome to episode 11 of our Unit 4 Financials feature Spotlight series. In this episode, we're going to look at Unit 4 Financials purchase order processing and purchase invoice matching. This video is a demonstration for Financials users that do not have these modules and may be thinking of acquiring them. Let's start with entering a purchase order. Now, within Unit 4 Financials, procurement and invoice matching are totally separate modules. The reason they are separate modules is that in some ways you don't need to have both modules. Let's explain in a bit more detail. The invoice matching can talk to any procurement system. For example, a client could have two procurement systems. They use Unit 4 Financials for their overheads, and they use a third-party procurement system for stock-related items, and invoice matching could do the invoice matching for both systems. There is a direct interface from Unit 4 procurement, but for the third-party procurement, normally either Millennium or somebody else qualified will provide an interface from the procurement system, the stock system, to feed Unit 4 Financials invoice matching. So, all the invoice matching, no matter where it's coming from, is going through Unit 4 invoice matching system. Now you are aware of that, let's start by putting a purchase order into Unit 4's purchasing system. This demonstration is purely using Unit 4 functionality. Now, as with Unit 4 Financials, everything in both the procurement and the invoice matching modules are all document-based. So, like Financials, you have documents. You have a document for a purchase order, you have documents for a goods received note, etc., etc. And you can have as many documents as you want. You could have a procurement document for IT, for capital that is. You could have another document for non-capital related items. You could even have documents per function. For example, you could have a marketing document, a finance document. There's no limit on what you can do, and there's no right way of doing it. It all depends on your organizational needs. Like finance, you have an input template. Here you can see a purchase order, and it's an input template that Millennium have designed, and we've kept it very simple for this demonstration video. Now, what you can do in procurement is you can add lots of user-defined fields. If there's information and you're looking at this and thinking, well, where do I put this? Where do I put this? Don't worry. This is just a simple demonstration, putting the bare minimum onto a purchase order. If you want to capture a lot more information that's pertinent to your organization, no problem. You can set up user-defined fields, and those user-defined fields, dependent on where you put them, can be routed through purchasing into invoice matching and finally into financials. If you put the user-defined fields on the header, then we cannot route it. But if you put information at the line level on a PO, that information is captured by the good received notes. It's then captured by the invoice in invoice matching, and then it can be transported by posting it into financial. There is a means of getting information all the way through from procurement, invoice matching to financials, and if you have fixed assets, into the asset ledger. As mentioned, this is an easy purchase order that we've set up for this video. So, procurement is multi-currency, like financials. You pick the currency. I've defaulted it to pound sterling, but this can be in any currency that you wish. The purchase order date defined to today's date, but again, you can override it and put whatever purchase order date you want. On the header, we must add the supplier code. The supplier I'm going to pick is PC World, and you can see it's like financials. You can start typing in the supplier name and up will come the code. Now, the same with the department. It's going to change this to IT, and it comes up with the department. Now you'll see that it's talking to financials at the moment. Remember, your supplier information is held in financials. So as soon as you put in PC World, it's now looking at the supplier address in financials. You have the ability, dependent on security, to change that. And also, it's looking at where you want it delivering to. You could have it delivered, for example, this is Millennium. It could go to the head office in Kent, or it could be to any of the branches throughout the world. That is totally configurable. The other thing to be aware of is that procurement can also be intercompany. For example, you could be raising purchase orders on one of your other companies throughout the world. Your home company will pay for the goods or services, but the actual charge would affect the other person's P&L. It's totally intercompany using. As you know in financials, you've got destination masters, receiver masters. All that functionality is captured in procurement and invoice matching. Once you've got the header information in, you can start putting the line information in. Let's put in a laptop, and you can see that within procurement, everything is governed by items. An item tells Unit4 Financials everything it needs to know. You can see here, it's automatically put in a price. I know, that's cheap for a laptop. It must be an old database at that price. You can set up prices. It defaults to a price which can be overwritten. As an example, it will also be linked to a GL code in financials. This is important because the buyer doesn't really need to know your chart of accounts. What's happening here is the buyer is entering information, and in the background, Unit4 Financials is deciding on how that document is built up for eventually when it's posted to financials. You can see here, I've got the department that might be, for example, the element 2. On the analysis line, on the P&L line that is, here we've got the supplier code. On your summary line, or on the creditor line, it knows what the code is to post that to. Presumably your GL code will be some kind of control account. It knows what the summary is, it's got the department for the P&L, and down here, because it's a laptop, it knows what the GL code is. You'll notice here that I haven't put anything to do with VAT, and that's a personal preference. You know what the rates are. PC World, a laptop is standard 20%, but not every country is as simplistic as the UK. If you are dealing in France and the continent, the VAT rates can be quite complex. Now I'm going to change this just to make it a bit more feasible. I'm going to set the quantities to 3. I'm going to validate. Now, what validation does is it's now talking to financials and ensuring that everything is okay. Does this supplier exist? Do the left-right lists work? In other words, can I charge IT to the GL code behind this item code? If you can't, it will error, but it all works in this demonstration. The document is valid. We now know that we can create a PO. The next stage for the buyer is to submit it for approval, and the way that works is it goes through a number of scenarios to get approved. At the background, there are positions that tells the system how much that person can authorize. And in the user profile, it tells the system for what they can authorize. Now I'm going to submit for approval, but because this is a demo, it set it up for auto approval. You can set up if, for example, you're quite happy for your buyers to buy anything below, say, £20 without going for approval. Yes, that can be configured. There's no rule forcing it to go through a workflow. This is set up for auto approval. Submit for approval, and here you could direct it to anybody in the position hierarchy if you wanted. But because I know this is going to be auto approved, and there it is. Number 34 has been approved. Now you could have set that up so that once it's approved, it would automatically send the approved purchase order physically by email to the supplier. Or you could go through a separate process of issuing. So it's approved, you can now go and issue it. We've actually sent this to the repository just to cut out that process of issuing, but there's nothing to stop you going through a subsequent process if you thought it necessary and you don't like things going directly out to a supplier, for people to take one last look at the purchase order for one last check and then send it to the supplier. Let's assume that the supplier has now got the PO, they either provide the goods or they provide the service, and at that point you're going to receipt the order. You're going to create a GRN. Add the PO number. And there's the document that we want to approve. You don't have to do too much. You don't have to create the document. Unit4 Financials will create the GRN based on the information on the PO. All you've got to decide on is how much you want to receive. You can see I've ordered 3. I'm just going to say receive all. And that's all you need to do. Save it. And we are now ready for entering the invoice. Now, it's worth mentioning that within the configuration, you could have set this up so that when you enter the invoice, you can set up an invoice validation workflow. So if the person had forgotten to receive the goods and you've got the invoice, then you can set it so that when you try and enter the invoice, it invokes workflow validation, and an email goes to the buyer or whoever needs reminding to receive those goods, so that you can then do your invoice matching in accounts payable. But let's just take the normal route that is now being recited, and we're going to put in the invoice. The first thing you've got to put in is the PO number, and you can see over here it says search for an LRN. Now don't get confused by that. An LRN is just the mirror image of a GRN. A GRN is goods receive note, LRN is logic receive notes. Remember, I said at the beginning that these are two separate modules and they use different terminology. For example, if you wanted to set them an interface between your other procurement module and here, you would be feeding in LRNs into this system. I've got the ability here to add lots of order numbers because your invoice may be matching against multiple invoice numbers, multiple GRNs, etc., etc. You can see that within invoice matching, it's quite flexible. It's a one-to-many, many-to-one, any variation you can match against. I'm now going to hit the search for an LRN. You can see it's found it because it's put in their PC world and it's put in the department for me. Let's just think about this. I'm holding a physical invoice from the supplier in front of me and I can start adding this information. Now, I'm doing this manually, but there's nothing stopping you from doing this automatically. If you've got a scanning or OCR system, then you can build an interface to feed the header information in automatically. All I'm doing here is demonstrating a manual method. I'm going to put in the invoice number, invoice date, and the invoice total. To keep this simple, I'll leave the VAT as 0. Remember, we did not put VAT on the PO, so what you're matching is the net amount. You don't want to match the VAT because the assumption is that the supplier's got the VAT right. And whatever the invoice, as far as the VAT is concerned, is what you're going to enter. There is no matching of the VAT. What we found in the past is, for example, if the buyer puts the wrong VAT code in and the supplier sends it by a different VAT code, it can create problems in invoice matching, and other problems can be VAT rounding. If Unit4 financials calculates to a certain amount and the supplier sends VAT, which is a penny difference, again, it can cause problems in invoice matching. So we tend to leave VAT matching out of this. I've disabled VAT matching on this document. I'm going to save and match the document. You can see I've put in £586.62, the assigned LRN 586.62. If I commit this, it will then post the document to financials. For the next part of this video demonstration, we're going to show you some variations. What I've shown you here is something simple. The goods received note equals the invoice. But say, for example, on the invoice there is freight charges, and you want to accept them. They weren't on the PO, but it's recognized that there will be freight charges. At the time that you raise the PO, you don't know what those freight charges should be, so you could not put them on the PO, but the supplier has charged you so much for freight, and you want to be able to balance this document. What I'm going to do is cancel this, go back here, and I'm going to change this and put £20 on. I'm going to save and match. What you'll see now is there's this £20 difference. Now there's different ways of doing this. We're only going to show you one method. What you can do is go into the actions here and you can add a sundry line to the document. So, what has happened on this database? Somebody has set up a sundry line master called freight, which helps. All you need to do is put in the £20 and hopefully it's going to balance. The freight, by the way, it's already decided here where to charge it to. You can see here somebody has already put in write-offs, finance, or it could go to freight charges. And here we're using a UDF, so that goes to an element 3. If I tick that, you can see it balances. It's got the assigned LRNs and it's got a sundry line. If we now post that to financials, it's going to post 4 lines instead of the normal 3. It's going to post to the creditor, it's going to post to the charge for the laptop, and it's also going to post £20 for the freight. And you're going to have one for the VAT. Let's make it even more difficult. Let's assume that they've overcharged. Let's say instead of £606.62, it's £609.62. Now, when we try to match, there is a £23 difference. Let's first sort out the sundry line, and that was for £20. But we still have this £3 difference. So what are we going to do with that? What Unit4 Financials allows you to do is to balance it. Dependent on security, determines whether it goes into a workflow. Now, because this is only £3, it's set that I can authorize this myself. But what you can do is, if it's above a certain tolerance, then it will go off to be authorized by the buyer or the manager, etc. for the difference. What we're going to do here is change it. What it is £3. Let's say the unit price they've overcharged. So instead of £195, it's £196. The quantity is still the same, and the discrepancy, well, we'll write it off. The reason is price. Now we apply the changes. It now balances. You can see here I've got another line balancing the £3 for quantity 3. And the original unit price, we've added another £1 off as a write-off. Let's commit that. It now goes to financials. Let's take a look. Looking at today's date, there is the document we've just posted. You can see there's quite a few lines here. There's the creditor for £609.62. There's the original charge. What we want to charge for the laptop of £586. Here is the additional charge of £3 for the overcharge. Here you can see it's posting to the same expense as the £586, but it's identifying it separately so that you can see where the supplier is overcharging you. Because when you think about it, for £3, it may or may not be worth your while in going to try and get a credit note for £3, etc., etc. But if this supplier keeps overcharging you, you've got a record of how many times they're doing this over a year. That could be a substantial amount. Then you could go back and say, over the past 12 months, you've overcharged me by £380 and request a credit note. You have the ability to show you've been overcharged. Here's the £20 for the freight, and there is 0 VAT. So that's a very quick introduction to procurement and invoice matching. It's aimed at those financials users who don't have the module. If you are interested in a live demonstration or have any questions, please get in touch, and we're always happy to help. You can watch more of our Unit4 Financial Spotlight series on our YouTube channel. Here at Millennium Consulting, we provide dedicated support for your business. Our team of consultant-grade application and technical experts provide you with a wealth of experience in supporting mission-critical systems. We monitor and manage your solutions so you do not have to, allowing you to focus on growing your business. Contact us for further details by visiting our website, millenniumconsulting.com. Thank you.